tabletop exercises, and I think they can help highlight gaps in budget or expertise and capabilities as well. They can also be used for very intense security theater, so please keep in mind that while my talk is about kind of how to make these better with realistic adversary tradecraft, the goal is to include your players, to help them learn, and to build relationships, not to show off how much you know about adversary tradecraft. So. Yeah, you can click it. OK, awesome. So this is a little bit about me, really quick. I know we're starting a little late. I live in Portland, Oregon. I like doing artsy things. I like the outdoors. I like lifting heavy things. Those are some of my security certifications. And I've planned and facilitated about 25 tabletop exercises in the last 2 or 3 years. My players have been utility companies, incident command team staff, security teams, high school students, federal agencies, state and federal regulators, operational technology engineers, industrial facility operators. It's been a broad spectrum. But what I've learned is that audiences respond to realism in the scenario. And one of the best ways to get realism is through incorporating threat intelligence and adversary tradecraft into the tabletop exercise, and really tell that story of an adversary in your environment and the choices they make or their fingerprints. That's a big part of making it realistic. Next slide, please. Thank you. So quick questions. How many of you are familiar with tabletop exercises as a concept? Wonderful. I love that. OK, how many of you have participated in one? Great. A little fewer, but still quite a few of you. How about planned one? Awesome. Facilitated one? Awesome. So the numbers kind of got smaller and smaller. Wherever you are at in your journey of being involved in these things, I'm hoping that this talk gives you something that will help you the next time you are planning one of these things or participating. Next slide, please. So this is our flow of show for today. Since exercises are fundamentally stories, this talk is in the format of the hero's journey, which is a template of a story, one of 7 elemental story types. So we will start with at the beginning with your call to adventure. You've been asked to do a tabletop or you want to do one. What's next? Gathering your tools, kind of crossing the threshold and helping your players kind of ease into their bad day that you will make for them. And then how to put them through the ordeal, which is the bulk of the exercise. That's where I'll get into the human fingerprints element. And then how to bring them back home with the elixir, which is the learnings that you get from the tabletop. All right, next slide, please. OK. So the call to adventure. So you want to plan a tabletop. Maybe you've been asked to do one. Maybe maybe it's an executive request. Maybe it's a compliance thing. I've heard from somebody at the speaker's reception like, well, I have a policy that tells me I need to do one of these things once a year. But regardless of where it's coming from, I highly recommend having an exercise planning team or gathering your fellowship. It doesn't have to be 8, 9 people or creatures in this case, but it can be really people from inside IT or security. They can help you map a viable attack path and understand your environment underneath the scenario. Or if they're from outside IT and security, they can help you understand what kinds of business impacts a realized threat would have, and they have a chance to learn about security. So it's really a win-win. So I recommend having a diversity of perspectives in your planning team. This also helps you avoid assumptions that are built into your scenario that you will, for sure, the players will find them during the exercise play. Next slide, please. So gathering your tools. So what is tradecraft? It's a pretty broad term. So it is an adversary's tactics, techniques, and procedures, as well as the tools that they use, how they use them, and the infrastructure that they use to deliver their capabilities. So it's pretty broad. One of the best sources of information that you can use for designing a tabletop is incidents that your customers or your clients or your company have already experienced. Kind of going back, kind of recasting it in a slightly different light, but trying to extract more learnings. This is especially true because by the time you're through a real-world incident and in the recovery stage, you just kind of, sometimes companies just want to get that over with, So there's still sometimes can be learnings from past incidents to extract. But regardless of what tradecraft you decide to focus on for your scenario, knowing your audience is totally crucial. So, including if you include specific tradecraft, if you know your audience, you'll know how much detail to go into about that tradecraft, because maybe your executives don't really care about malware compilation, environment markers. Maybe they care more and will respond better to adversary working hours and patterns in those choices. So knowing your audience, using those empathy muscles. There was a great talk on empathy yesterday about learning to see things from another person's perspective. I recommend doing that with your players as well, so you can understand what do they care about, what are their priorities, and then how can you weave those into the scenario in ways that will ensure that during gameplay they have some skin in the game. And then other tools to use. The MITRE ATT&CK Navigator is a free public tool. It's just another way to view the MITRE ATT&CK matrix. You can sort by threat actor to see what TTPs they use, and it's nice and visual. I'll have a screenshot in a second. But again, that's a great tool. And then an honorable mention I don't have time to go into right now is the Homeland Security Exercise and Evaluation Program, or HSEEP. It is an exercise planning framework developed by the Department of Homeland Security, and it is, again, free, public to use. Next slide, please. Quick screenshot of the MITRE ATT&CK Navigator, filtering by threat groups, selection controls, search, threat groups, into layer controls. You can export as an Excel document and have all of the threat groups' TTPs available for you. This is great inspiration for tabletops, and you can totally base the tabletop adversary off of a real threat group. You can also make up your own threat group. That's something I've done before. So in making your own threat group, you could take TTPs from a known threat group and then kind of rebrand it. I once created my own kind of fictitious ransomware group that was built on cat puns and just had cat puns everywhere, and in the ransomware note, which someone ended up actually reading aloud. I didn't expect that. And the players had fun with that, and they got some laughs out of it, and that ultimately is part of the experience as well. Next slide, please. So you have your fellowship, your planning team, you have your tools, some of your tools. Now it's time to start drafting your scenario, and I usually start with the known environment. So your first event in the scenario, called your inject, should be something that is a somewhat common operational event. So I like threat intelligence bulletins or common detections, or even just a news article, that maybe one of your players, if you're playing with a more strategic level audience, maybe one of your players says, hey, I found a news article, and the group talks about it. The reason why I like starting with the known environment is it gives people a chance to settle into the operating model of the exercise and to align on language, because especially if you're involving non-technical, non-security people in your exercises, which I highly recommend doing, these are a lot to walk into. There's a lot of specialized language in security that can be very daunting for new people in the room. So giving them something to ease in to the exercise really, I think, helps set people at ease. But all along, however you're establishing the known and then crossing into the unknown, which I'll talk about in a second, considering the adversary and their objective. What is their goal in your environment or the company's environment, and what are they choosing to do in that environment? So once you've established the known, crossing into the unknown by giving your players the first little inclination or indication that they're about to have a bad day. That bad day should be fictitious but plausible. So maybe, again, it's a detection firing. Maybe it's a user reporting saying, hey, this server's down. It could be anything. But crossing into the unknown over that threshold is an important piece of your scenario. OK, keep going. Thank you. So this is really kind of where the scenario starts to feel more incident-y. And this is where we get back to the concept of the adversary's choices or their human fingerprints. So this is just a few examples. But there should be a clear scaffolding in this phase of the scenario of suspiciousness. So maybe your first inject is a news media article. Your second inject is somebody calling the help desk to report kind of a sluggish behavior on a device. Maybe your third inject is, hey, we found some suspicious network traffic on this server or something. But scaffolding up, having at least 3 injects, that's what I found has worked well in this phase of the scenario. So your human fingerprints, some of the adversary choices you can highlight at this phase. Mistakes, OPSEC failures, these happen. Patterns in working hours and days, or days off. Different places in the world have different holidays, and you can play with that. IP addresses, kind of going back to the OPSEC idea of that choice. If your IP address, say you have a phishing email in the beginning of your scenario, and that phishing email has a sender IP, maybe that sender IP is the same as their C2 server. Kind of sloppy, but it does happen. Same thing for the email address. Maybe the email address that sent a phishing email or something was had the same domain as the billing contact on Whois, which they forgot to make private. So these are just a few examples. Also, naming conventions for malicious files and folders. Has anybody read the book Sandworm by Andy Greenberg? Okay, a few of you. Awesome. Highly recommend it. There's a lot of, one of the threads that he pulls on that helps with attribution is a series of references to Dune, the science fiction series. So if you're playing with naming conventions during your exercise, I recommend checking out that book because that's a great theme and great example of adversary choices kind of fueling attribution as well. Hashes, this is kind of a gimme, but if you find a malicious file and there are, it matches the hash of another known malicious file, you can include that in your scenario. Also, there's a great SANS white paper about human fingerprints in malware, so like code reuse, header metadata, that sort of thing. We don't have time to go into that level of detail right now, but again, great resource. I'll have it linked at the end as well. All right, next slide. So you've thrown the ring into Mount Doom. You've put your players through their paces and put them through the ordeal. You've incorporated human fingerprints into kind of the scenario and what the adversary's done in the environment. Recovery is still a very important part of the incident response lifecycle. It doesn't get as much airtime in my experience as other phases like detection and then the initial response, but an effective way to incorporate it in a scenario and to further expose the adversary's human fingerprints is by doing a time jump. So you can say, kind of towards the end of your scenario, 2 months into the future, these things have happened, this is what we found, and then you can discuss as well. So this is also a great opportunity, since that is complete guesswork for the most part, to validate your understanding of what would happen during the recovery phase, and to talk about with your planners and with your players what they think might be a priority after an incident. Next slide, please. Returning with the elixir, the learning from these exercises should be immediate. So there are some brains who like to immediately verbally process when they go through one of these things. And they like to share what they think should be done and after action items and all of that. Other people need time to process. So I do recommend having maybe a short hot wash or retrospective for more verbal processors in the moment, and then something longer, probably no more than like a week later, to accommodate other brains and types of processing. That's also another opportunity to ask your players about the adversary's choices that you think they might have picked up on in the scenario, or maybe they didn't pick up on them. Like, why would the adversary have gone after this set of assets? Why do you think they did that? Those sorts of questions, which can lead to really interesting conversations about asset criticality and what those players care about and what they think is a priority versus what you think is a priority. And that's part of just what I think makes exercises valuable, is they're just an excuse to have a conversation in a safe, no-fault environment. And then whatever your after-action items are, whatever action items your group, your players identify, make sure you document those in an after-action report as part of the process. Okay, move on. Thank you. So some of the key takeaways, consider incorporating adversary choices and highlighting those in your scenario design. What are they choosing to do and why? There's a lot of great conversations that can come from that. You can use intelligence about real incidents, either ones that your company or your customers have experienced, or ones that you read about, like in Sandworm. Also leverage MITRE ATT&CK and the Navigator. Those are free, wonderful tools. And then just getting creative, and if you can, have fun with it. Like, it can be an enjoyable process, especially with a good group of planners. But most of all, meet your players where they're at. I already mentioned the language barrier that can come up. but with folks who don't live and breathe security all day, which is most people, and tailoring the experience and the language that you use to describe adversary behavior to things that they will understand and to a language that makes sense to them is what this is all about. And then be ready for a lot of questions. There's, in my experience for scenario design, you'll usually throw out more than you keep. And you'll also have, it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg in the things that you surface to players through the scenario is just the impacts that the adversary has and the observable artifacts. Otherwise, there's a whole lot of other stuff that the players might never see, but they might ask about. So just be ready to expose more of that iceberg. All right, next slide. Thank you. These are a few of the resources that inspired me and this talk. So APT1 is a pretty historic cyber threat intel paper by Mandiant, which dealt in attribution of one of China's cyber espionage units. There's that SANS white paper, also Sandworm, thank you, Andy Greenberg, and Cuckoo's Egg by Clint Stoll. Somebody else yesterday, one of the speakers, Kat, mentioned Cuckoo's Egg, and I love that because it's a very accessible narrative of somebody who is observing adversary behavior in real time. And to me, when I read that book, that adversary felt very real. It felt like they were, Clint was like, not that I know Clint in person, but dear Clint, it felt like he was, really interacting in some sort of way with that adversary and making it feel real it was really great. And then, of course, the SANS Cyber Threat Intelligence class is wonderful. All right, next slide. Thank you. So that's everything that I had for you today. I think I'm good on time. I have time for a few questions. That's my email address. If you want to argue or just discuss anything that I shared today, please reach out to me. I would love to have a conversation, and that's my LinkedIn as well. That is my link to the conference talk from today, the PDF. And it's in a folder called Conferences. There's just one talk in it because this is actually my first security conference talk. So thank you all for being my first audience. Really appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Do any of you have questions? Yes.
The last time I did one of these talks was for a small company. The corporate company was 20 employees. The technology group was about 4. So that was outsourced. So by the time I had finished a reconnaissance trying to figure out what the staff was and where an attack might occur and identified an opportunity, the key players all knew what I was thinking already. Any advice on how to deal with a situation like that?
I would say just include them in the planning process then. In an ideal world, you would have some people in your planning team and then some people as just players, and so they wouldn't necessarily have spoilers. But in a small group like what you're describing, just involving them from the get-go, I don't see the harm in that because then you can still talk through, and maybe that changes your learning objectives too for the exercise of what the goals are for your, if you already know what the exercise is going to look like, then you can just start to think about in advance, what does the response process look like? And maybe you can focus even on recovery too, because that's more of an unknown. Awesome. Any other questions? Yes?
Just wanted to ask, how many hours do you plan for planning, and how many hours do you plan for the actual exercise?
That's a great question.
And how many for the write-up?
How many for the write-up? Oh my gosh. Well, Copilot's been helping with that. But so hours for planning. So the number of players, as that grows, the amount of planning time expands as well. So I like to keep, and I recommend keeping your exercises small if you're just starting with this, like 10 to 15 players max. Smaller than 10 can be really enjoyable and fruitful as well. I find at least 3 one-hour planning meetings, and each of those probably takes an hour or 2 outside of that to work on the scenario and draft kind of preparation materials. So at least 10 hours for planning, I'd say. And then I generally, unless it's like backdoors and breaches or something, I don't like to spend less than 2 hours in exercise play. So a 2-hour exercise. And I've done 4-hour exercises as well. And then I've helped plan but haven't facilitated an 8-hour one as well, which is much longer. So yeah, does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay, awesome. And then who else? I thought I saw more hands. Yes, I think you were next, yeah.
Well, you stole my question about
About time. Yes, it is time intensive.
I had one scenario where I had a PR gal.
Mm-hmm.
She was really, really good at her job.
Mm-hmm.
And I banned her from future her tabletop exercises, but she would just take over and answer all the questions.
Oh.
So if you get, maybe tell somebody to shut up or something like that. I didn't in the moment, but looking back on it, I kind of wish I would have just said, hey, you can't, you're playing too well.
Yeah.
Everybody else needs to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a facilitation, I think, is a bit of an art and a science. So balancing input. You can also, what I've done before for very senior participants who will know all the answers, I've said, this person's on a plane and they're unavailable. And I put that in the scenario. And maybe I have them going to Iceland or something, and then the next inject I free them up. And I give them a heads up in advance, of course, that I'm making them unavailable, but that can be a good way to help other people learn, as well as asking that person to send a delegate, too. I've done that as well. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you adjust the difficulty of your exercises as groups get better at their incident management process?
Yeah, that's a great question. So exercises in general, like if there's no process, they can help figure out what the process is, but if there is a process, it can help mature it and validate it. So you can always mature and validate that as much as possible. And then if they're doing really well on discussion-only exercises, you can make it functional too. So you can actually emulate some threat actor behavior in your environment so they can validate the detection part of that in addition to the response part of that. Yeah, that's one idea. Yeah, any other questions? Yes.
Do you have any recommendations for prop generation for like a smaller tabletop, just to generate the screenshots or to generate some of the fake emails or the spoofs, aside from just use Copilot or ChatGPT?
It's a great question. Besides generative AI and just hand producing them, I've created like fake alerts from like state agencies and had like this is an exercise like in as a watermark. But yeah, putting an official looking logo. There's a lot that can be communicated with just like here put the state or federal seal on it. So I'd say keep it simple. You could spend a lot of time on props, but I actually haven't incorporated a ton of those in my exercises. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes, yeah. You haven't asked a question.
So kind of back to the small, medium-sized business scenario, though.
Yeah.
One of the things I've struggled with is just convincing stakeholders that this is worth it to do a desktop exercise of some sort. Usually we've got great retros and we've had some incidents, so we're talking about those. Why do we need to spend this extra time, engineering time, doing tabletop exercises? So what else do you get out of this? How can I take that to the stakeholders?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's always the argument of this helps with muscle memory, so we can handle incidents better when we practice together. There's also compliance requirements if you have those as well. And there's sometimes you can it depends on the risks that you're trying to address with the tabletop, and sometimes these risks seem like very high impact but low probability. So I think having the conversation about the probability of something happening and then exercising your response to it, that probability conversation is probably what's holding up your stakeholders, if I had to guess with my very, very limited information. And that's a hard conversation to have, but pulling things from IBM's state of the data cost of a data breach report is great. The Verizon annual report is also great, and assigning a dollar value to like, hey, and also a dollar value to dwell time. Like if we don't catch the adversary in our environment or our response is inadequate or ineffective, this is what it will cost you in dollars and cents. Not a perfect answer, but that's what I got for you. I think maybe one more question. Yes.
Kind of that similar line, what do you measure to show people make progress through the tabletop exercise?
Yeah, so that goes back to learning objectives, and I might have skipped talking about that actually, now I'm thinking about it, but all your exercises should have learning objectives, ideally no more than 3, that should be specific, measurable, actionable, time-bound, all of that. And whether or not the exercise achieves the objectives is one success metric. And then collecting feedback from folks who go through incidents and asking them if they think the tabletop helped them respond to the incident better. So that more of that qualitative feedback as well. I think that's all we have time for. I want to get out of here for the next speaker. Thank you all again. All right.